Hi guys, it's Michelle. Today I'm wearing a hat because it's a Stranger Things hat. How cute. Anyway, gonna flip it backwards though because I feel like the shadows are just a lot, you know? Wow. This is the gayest I've ever looked, and honestly, I'm really here for it. So today's video is going to be all about Stranger Things. Honestly, is something that's really interesting to me. I'm deadass so weirded out by like this entire thing that I feel like I haven't heard any YouTubers talk about, which is kind of crazy to me because whatever the hell went on with this whole thing is actually insane, and I can't wait to tell you guys about it. But basically it is the truth behind Stranger Things, because if you guys didn't know, Stranger Things is actually loosely, I would say not even that loosely, but loosely based on a true story. It's interesting, so let's get into it. If you guys don't know what Stranger Things is, you're probably living under a rock because it's pretty much everywhere. But if you don't know, it's a Netflix original drama kind of with like a sci-fi vibe that was created by the Duffer Brothers, and it premiered in 2016. It starred the icon, the queen, the legend, Winona Ryder, who I love with all my heart, and also debuted a ton of young actors who now have like full-on careers like that look really bright ahead of them because of this show has done so well, and it has a huge fandom. So what not a lot of people have talked about is that Stranger Things is actually based on a true story. It's based on the Montauk Project, which we are going to talk about today. That's what the video today is going to be about, the Montauk Project and how it connects with Stranger Things. And before researching this video, I had heard the idea that it was created and like was based on this entire Montauk Project, though I didn't really know what that meant because like I said, I hadn't researched it yet. And I thought it was going to be loosely based on this, but it's essentially the entire plot of the show, except for it allegedly happened in real life, and we're gonna get into that. And honestly, it kind of makes me question everything that's ever happened in my life, and I feel kind of weird about this entire thing, so let's get into it. So Montauk is a place on Long Island, New York, which is where I'm from. I mean, I'm not from Montauk, but I've been there before. This place, this entire experiment, this entire thing, conspiracy essentially is what it is like almost, I would say, kind of has an Area 51 kind of feel to it, except for not necessarily about aliens, but more about time travel and stuff like that, which is I find more interesting because I feel like we have heard so much about aliens and like UFOs and stuff, but to think that like time travel could actually exist or something deeper, like whatever the hell is going on in this Montauk experiment is actually insane. So I think that this whole thing is so interesting. So like I said, I wasn't sure how inspired Stranger Things really was by this because obviously Stranger Things is, you know, sci-fi. It's like fantasy, like kind of unrealistic. However, after reading this stuff, it's pretty much exactly what happens in Stranger Things that these people are claiming happened to them in real life. And it was so inspired to the point where the show was actually going to be named Montauk, and it was going to take place in Long Island, New York, but they had some changes and decided to call it Stranger Things instead. Anyway, we are going to get into what the Montauk Project is exactly and all of the evidence and the creepiness behind it, and honestly, if it doesn't leave you shook, I don't really know what will, because I'm kind of bald with this. So in the mid-1980s, rumors began to spark up around the fact that the US government may have potentially been conducting psychological warfare experiments in Montauk on Long Island, New York. This all kind of came to light with Preston B. Nichols writing a book called The Montauk Project: Experiments in Time. So in Nichols' book, he claims these are repressed memories that have been recently recovered, and that is why he is writing the book on these experiences that he claims that he genuinely had in the 1970s and 1980s in Montauk, New York, while being kind of controlled by the US government and being used for experimentation and a bunch of other really, really weird stuff. He claims that these particular experiments took place in Camp Hero, Montauk Air Force Station, and that these experiments even included things like time travel, which is super interesting, and we're gonna get into it as we go. So like the premise of what Nichols talks about in his book also connects the Montauk Project to something called the Philadelphia Experiment, which took place in the 1940s. So in the 1940s, obviously this was during World War II and during the Holocaust and everything that was going on with the Nazis. During this time, the Philadelphia Experiment, also called Project Rainbow, which sounds like my kind of project. It was believed that this Philadelphia experiment was made to create a way for the US ships to get over to Europe without the Nazis noticing or finding them on their radar. Now this part is like where honestly this whole thing kind of gets a little confusing because it obviously defies what we know as possible, and I just say like kind of keep an open mind when hearing this. Obviously this is from people's experiences. There's no genuine like proof, because I feel like other than people's memories there wouldn't be able to be proof of this, at least that we could find. But it's kind of the same thing with Area 51, is that there's not been able to be solid like proof of this other than people's memories and what people are telling us that used to work there. So it's kind of like the same thing in that sense. Like I said, the Philadelphia Experiment was so that the Nazi radar wouldn't be able to see these United States boats that were bringing over supplies to the United States allies. So this was the entire intent of the Philadelphia Experiment, and basically there has been kind of evidence with this in the sense of they were able to get a ton of supplies over to the different allies in Europe without the Nazis noticing. However, when I like talked about this and people were confused as to how it happened, the Navy never really spoke upon how they actually did that, and kind of just kept everything pretty hush-hush with the whole thing. Because the US Navy succeeded with getting these boats over, a lot of conspiracy theorists wanted to look deeper into how the hell they actually did that. And a lot of theorists came up with different ideas, but one of them included a way to make their ships unknown to the Nazis was like through a different dimension, which kind of sounds like the Upside Down, though there is a lot more stuff that sounds like the Upside Down coming later. But that is kind of what conspiracy theorists have talked about with the Philadelphia Experiment, is that there must have been some type of dimension or some type of time portal where these people could get their boats past the Nazi radar. Either way, the project ended up being shut down, so maybe they came across some complications. Like I said, the Navy has never come clean or talked about this at all. And because some conspiracy theorists felt so strongly about this project and like really wanted to know what was going on, they actually created a movie called The Philadelphia Experiment, and this was created in 1984, and a man named Al Bielek actually saw this movie in 1988, so 4 years after the movie was released, and he claimed that he had such an overwhelming feeling of eeriness and like a feeling of like he's been there before, he's seen this exact like thing, he's heard like this exact story even though he hadn't before. And he felt so much like this that he decided to go through hypnotherapy, which a lot of people do to like recover repressed memories, and that is exactly what he did. And that is when he came across the fact that his entire life had actually been a lie. And like I said, this is all according to him and his repressed memories and the people who have talked about this before, like Preston Nichols as well. It's kind of like a similar thing. Basically, Al claims that he recovered repressed memories with actually working on the Montauk Project as well as the Philadelphia Experiment. His memory also recovered that his name was actually Edward Cameron and that he also had a brother named Duncan Cameron as well. His memory included them together working when they were in their mid-20s on the Philadelphia Experiment. Now, this is gonna obviously sound very outrageous, but he and his brother claimed that in the 1940s that Nikola Tesla was an inventor and electrical engineer in the early 1900s. Al claimed that Nikola Tesla figured out how to make the USS Eldridge become invisible to get past the Nazi radar. And he claims that during this process, like trying to make it become invisible or like trying to work with how to get it off the Nazi radar, created a time wormhole into the future that sucked in the ship. Al claims that him and his brother were on board and jumped off the vessel and landed at none other than the Montauk Camp Hero on August 12th of 1983. Once Al started getting his story out there, this is when Preston Nichols began to come in contact with him because they obviously shared some similar memories about the Montauk Project. Now we're gonna go through the things that Preston Nichols and Edward Cameron / Al and his brother Duncan claim happened to them in the Montauk Project world. So obviously, like I said, this all is based on personal memory and repressed memories that they claim are true. And this is what happened, and you're gonna realize that there are tons of similarities between what they claim happened and Stranger Things. Obviously, this is years before Stranger Things because Stranger Things was based on these experiences. So Preston Nichols claimed that he actually worked with Edward Cameron. So when we refer to Edward Cameron, I'm just gonna refer to him as that and not Al anymore, because Al was his name like in the future, I guess. That he, like his repressed name, his fake name, I guess. So we're gonna just refer to him as Edward Cameron and his brother Duncan Cameron. So Preston Nichols, like I said, claimed that he worked with Edward Cameron and Duncan Cameron on something called the Montauk chair in the 1970s, which was a piece of furniture that used electromagnetics to amplify psychic powers. According to both Preston Nichols and Edward Cameron, they claim that Edward's brother, Duncan Cameron, was a child born in 1963 that was found to have a psychic powers. According to them, Duncan became the main focus of the many Montauk chair experiments because he had these psychic abilities, which is obviously very, very similar to 11, most likely where she was based off of. So she is Duncan in this situation. Another thing that they claimed that Duncan Cameron could do was take an object, like a lock of somebody's hair, and be able to like go into a zone where he could literally see out of the person whose hair they're holding. Like he could see anywhere in the world from their eyes and hear things from their thoughts and their like perspective, which is so crazy, and like if that's true, that's insane. And that would be really cool. Also, it was almost like taking him through a portal through the person that he was holding the object of. Preston Nichols also talked about there being other children involved with the Montauk Project. He claims that boys were brought in and experimented on. Some were even taken through some sort of a portal to an unknown space in an unknown time, which sounds pretty similar to the Upside Down. Now, I think that this is kind of interesting because Stranger Things took this but made it with females. So like Duncan Cameron is obviously representative of 11, and then all the other boys that were experimented on in the Montauk Project could be how 11 had her sister 8 or Collie. So that kind of leaves us open to more potential for season 3 of Stranger Things. I mean, this isn't like a Stranger Things conspiracy theories, but I kind of wonder if they're gonna have even more young girls who were experimented on, kind of like how Preston Nichols, Duncan Cameron, and Edward Cameron claim it was during the Montauk Project. So that'd be pretty interesting to see. Going back to the story, once again, according to Preston Nichols, he was told at one point to leave the Montauk chair running through August 12th of 1983. Which, if you remember going back to Duncan Cameron and Edward Cameron's story, that was the same day that they allegedly fell into the Montauk Project, even though they were already there, which is where it makes it kind of confusing. In the sense of, they believe that there was 2 portals in 1943 and in like the present day of 1983 in Montauk, New York, and in Philadelphia, and that the power of these 2 things were what created the wormhole. So it's kind of confusing at that point, and it's kind of hard to understand because obviously it defies what we know is true and what we know is possible. So Preston Nichols claimed that there was a time where like obviously the 1943 version of Duncan Cameron came into the Montauk Project, and then also the 1963 one already existed in that time. So he wanted to keep them away from each other because he realized then that time travel could be very, very dangerous and like the ripple of time and the entire effect. During that time, everything started to get crazy in the Montauk Project. Apparently, Duncan released some sort of monster from his subconscious. It was a hairy monster and it was creepy as hell, and it was described by many people. And this monster is somewhat representative to a Demogorgon. I think that's like where they got the idea of it, and that the entire Demogorgon is basically in 11's mind. It was created by her. That's kind of a conspiracy for the show and like a theory of what it was supposed to be. When they started to realize things were getting out of hand, Preston Nichols was the one who was in charge of destroying all of the equipment for the Montauk chair, which basically ended everything. And then he believes after that point that everyone that was working on the experiment's brain was completely washed, and they would never remember the Montauk Project again until their memories were recovered later on. So I find this whole thing to be super interesting. Obviously, there are some confusing pieces that like are just weird because, like I said, it really breaches what is real for us and like what we thought was ever possible. But it is interesting to question because it kind of reminds me of things like, first of all, time travel obviously was involved, and also like alien abductions and stuff like that. Like, imagine if your entire life was just repressed and you think that you don't remember stuff from your childhood because you were too young, but really it was because you've been brainwashed. It's honestly kind of scary, and it kind of just like takes your entire reality and just kind of flips it upside down and makes you wonder, what can you actually believe in? What is actually real? Literally, what is real? We don't know. Either way, this is the creepiest thing that I think came out of this because it kind of shows some sort of physical evidence that we did have from the Montauk Project ever existing. In 2008, an unidentified animal carcass actually brushed up onto the shore on the Montauk, Long Island beach, and it looks terrifying. So this was dubbed as the Montauk Monster. Regardless of whether people believed the story or not, this was just what people called it because it was in Montauk, and it literally looks like a monster. It looks so creepy as hell. And I just think that is so weird because what if that actually was the monster created by Duncan Cameron? What if this whole thing is real? Like, we don't have a way of knowing, and I think that's what creeps me out the most. And it creeps me out that these government experiments could exist and there's really nothing we can do about it, and that's creepy, and it makes you wonder what kind of government experiments are possibly going on right now, considering our technology has advanced extremely since the 1980s. You can only imagine. But yes, that is it for today's video. If you guys liked it, please give it a big thumbs up. Let me know in the comments what you guys think about this. Make sure you follow me on Twitter, Snapchat, and Instagram because I'm always posting really dope ass shit on there. Subscribe for new videos every single day, and I'll see you all tomorrow. Bye.
What kind of fuckery?